Hey everyone, brave souls, to another journey into the realm of darkness and suspense. I'm thrilled to have you here as we dive into bone-chilling tales that will send shivers down your spine. Before we begin, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell to stay on the edge of your seat for every eerie story. Now, let the haunting tales commence. My name is Isaac, I'm 22 years old, and I'm going to tell you the only story in my mega weird life, and which I thought almost killed me, at least at the time. The more I think about it, the more I tell myself I was oblivious at the time. I didn't realize anything. It was about 3.5 years ago, I think, and I was living in a shared apartment with a guy older than me. He was a police officer, and his name was Francois. It was a good arrangement, honestly, it suited us both very well, and it was a lovely little apartment. One evening, I experienced the worst insomnia of my life. I couldn't go to bed, and I ended up not sleeping at all. Next thing I know, it's 9 a.m. I regularly had bouts of insomnia, not being able to sleep and all that, but I don't know what it was about this. It was just a strange feeling. It was different than usual. At the time, I was laying on the sofa bed, and my roommate was in the actual room. I don't know, I just felt this weird feeling twisting in my stomach. Anyway, I decided I needed to get a can of Monster Energy. I had insomnia, so I needed a little pick-me-up. It was now 10:30 a.m. I work from home and don't have a job where I have to go out to the office or anything, so it was fine. I had the time to leave for a bit. I came home and my roommate was supposed to have already left. It was completely dark in the room though, and all the shutters were closed. Normally he would open them himself much before this. I told myself he must be sick and that he must have informed his work that he'd be staying home. I went into his room and it was pitch black inside. I didn't dare to turn the lights on and fear that he might be sleeping. I asked him if he was okay, very slowly, so as to not disturb him if he was. That strange feeling was even stronger now. He didn't answer me with words, just gave me a growl to say let me sleep. His head was in the duvet, he must have been real cold. His forehead and hair were the only things sticking out. I'm telling you again, but it was pitch black in there and I couldn't really see him very well. As the day went on, he was laying in bed all day. I was starting to get worried about him. He must have been real sick. I took a 1.5 hour nap on the sofa. Around 1:45 or 2 p.m. roughly. Since I'm an insomniac, I needed every few hours I could get of sleep just to survive. I felt even more tired after the nap. I knew I wasn't going to last long, and I was going to go to bed early. Or at least really try to. The evening arrived and it was around 10:30. It was starting to get dark when suddenly I hear the apartment door open, but with the keys. With the keys now in the apartment lock, I got up to see who it was. And what do you know, it was my roommate who was coming back from being away for several days with friends of his. So of course there he is right in front of me. I didn't remember that he had been on vacation, maybe he hadn't told me he was going. In that moment I understood what was happening. I asked my roommate to step out for a moment before he came back inside. I locked the door from outside and explained to him that since the beginning of the day there had been someone in his room skulking about. He's a police officer, but unfortunately in our country it's forbidden for him to have his service weapon on him. He decided to go into the home anyway and go see. While I was still standing at the door, I called the police. I was really not feeling well. I was sweating a lot. I was exhausted. My mind was running slowly. The police told me they would arrive in 10 minutes and to wait at the door outside. Obviously, I went inside to see if my roommate was okay. As soon as I stepped into the room, I could see my roommate on the floor. He had been knocked out by the man who was sleeping in his room. The man who was in the bed, I didn't know him at all, and neither did my roommate. He had a sunken face, enormous dark circles around his eyes, a big mustache too. The man was really not good looking. The police arrived soon after and took him away. According to the police, he was a guy wanted for larceny, which has full assault, and was under the influence of drugs when he was in our home. I've since moved to an apartment where I can see all the rooms from the living room, and that's very reassuring. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. I've been living for 4 years in a small town in the Yamagata district, a pretty small district in the north of Japan, known for its mountains. It's in the name of the area really, and its rice fields as far as the eye can see. It's also known for its rustic and delicious food. This story took place a few months after my separation from my boyfriend. Was still living in France. He was my first love, and the relationship had lasted almost 9 years. We separated because the distance was driving us crazy, and for my part one couldn't see myself returning to France ever. I loved my job, and the people in my town where I lived now needed me. I felt accomplished. For his part, he had also found a job in France he was just as passionate about. He didn't speak Japanese and had no friends here. We couldn't ask each other to sacrifice our happiness to live together. We still loved each other very much as we separated, and our separation was therefore very hard for me. I mourned the end of our relationship for a long time. I no longer wanted to go to the gym, having gone 6 times a week before our separation. I only drank junk food, and I started drinking a glass of wine every day. Then 2, then 3, in short, I began to completely let myself go. My friends advised me to meet some new boys to take my mind off things and regain the desire to take care of myself and my body. It wasn't a bad idea, it could help me break my routine and get me out of the house a bit. The problem, I lived in the Japanese countryside. The Yamagata district is one of the oldest ones in Japan. I have a lot of friends aged 40 and 50, but very few friends my age. Finding a potential partner more than a decade older than me who I liked and who liked me back was almost impossible. My friends recommended I use a dating app. Of course, the profiles recorded in the surrounding area were extremely few. We extended the search to surrounding districts. And after an evening of swiping, I relieved a super lag from Shoei, a very charming man with a very beautiful smile. He was 2 years younger than me, but I struck up a conversation right away. He had quite a sense of humor, and he seemed smart. He responded fairly quickly to my messages. He had just graduated from Sendai University and returned home to work in a real estate agency for less than a year. I had a good feeling about this one. The only downside, he lived in a small town in the Akita district, more than 3.5 hours by train from where I lived. We continued to talk for about 2 weeks without ever meeting. After that, we didn't talk for almost a week. I told myself he must have moved on. It didn't really matter. I stopped using the application because all of my exchanges so far had been unsuccessful. After that week passed by, I received a message on the app. It was him telling me that his real estate agency had given him a big negotiating assignment in my city, and he could meet up with me the very next evening. I was surprised to learn he had such big business in my very small town, but oh well, I agreed to go see him, not really having anything better to do. We met at the station to go have a drink at a nearby izakaya. In the evening I arrived at the station and waited for him. He was a little bit late. I could see him coming from afar. I was relieved. He actually did look like his photos. He was a very handsome man. He could have any girl he wanted. I said hello to him from a distance, and the closer he got, the more I realized he was kind of trembling. I didn't dare to point it out to him. I told myself he was probably just shy. He told me I was so pretty, and that he was happy to meet me. He gave a big smile like in all his photos. I don't know why, but I could immediately feel this was a fake smile. Something was making me uncomfortable, and I had an unpleasant feeling in my stomach. We entered the izakaya right next to the station. It was one with compartments that were not real closed rooms, but partitions that separated the tables, so you couldn't see what was happening in the next one over, even if you could hear absolutely everything being said. We first had a beer to start the evening, as is customary in Japan. We chatted a little, and he seemed to relax a bit and stop shaking. I asked him if his colleague liked the city, and he replied, "No, I came alone." I found it immediately suspicious that a first-year employee would be sent so far away on a big job without a more experienced colleague at his side. It would never have happened like that at my job. I told myself the rules can change from company to company though. I asked him if the train journey wasn't too boring. He tells me, "No, I came with my car." Now I was starting to get really weirded out. For long journeys like that, almost 4 hours, you'd definitely travel by train. But hey, maybe it's a special rule from his real estate agency or something. I asked him which real estate agency he was dealing with. Because I had moved not too long ago, and perhaps I knew one of his partners or something. He seemed caught off guard by my question and stammered for a long time before answering. He replied he negotiated with a large real estate chain in my town. It was a real place, not mine, but I definitely heard of them. I was reassured to know he was at least not lying about that, and I ordered a second beer. After a while I wanted to go to the bathroom. I stepped away. My false eyelashes were a bit crooked, so I took a few moments to glue them back in. I was gone for a total of 4 or 5 minutes. I came back, we started talking again, and I took a sip of my beer. The taste was exactly the same. That's not what was bothering me. From the moment I grabbed my mug, his gaze was looking at me so insistently. It was not the same look he'd been giving me before I went to the bathroom. I had that unpleasant feeling in my stomach again that I'd had when he smiled at me in front of the station. I put down my drink immediately. I pretended the beer was disgusting and I didn't like it. That was a lie. I told him I wanted to vomit. "That's such a shame you're wasting half the glass." I apologized by saying it was really horrible. "But you were drinking it before." I shied away by playing the polite foreigner card. I told him I was forcing myself, because I knew in Japan you always drink a beer to start an evening, and I wanted to follow the tradition. He really tried to guilt me into drinking some more. This was obviously very suspicious. Why did he want me to drink this drink so badly? I told him that if he didn't want to make a mess, then he could drink it instead of me. Imagine my surprise when he refused, claiming he was already too drunk. And that tomorrow he had to drive home early in the morning to return to Akita. Drunk, after a beer and a half, when he was planning to drink even more before I went to the bathroom, I was certain he had done something fishy while I was in there. I understood now, he had bad intentions. I tried to find a way to end the meeting without alerting him. We abandoned the story of the beer, which remained untouched for the rest of the dinner. He continued to talk at me for an hour and a half. A bit too long for my tastes. At one point he went to the bathroom with his bag in tow. I couldn't check what he had in his bag, but I could check my beer now. As I lifted the glass up, I could see a fine white deposit at the bottom. Completely unlike the yeast deposits that can be found in certain unfiltered beers, it was powdery, very fine. I didn't have to take out my cell phone and search the internet for what it was, I already knew. He came back and I slammed it down on the table. He told me he was going to sleep in his car looking sad. "Why don't you go to the hotel across the street? Does your company reimburse you for the night?" He told me no because his agency had planned for him to return during the day, but that if I agreed to spend the night with him, he would take a hotel room. I laughed to end the conversation and bid him good night before getting into the first taxi that passed by. As soon as I got home, I vomited in disgust at what had happened. The next morning, I told my colleague at work about it. She had a friend who worked at the agency that he had said he negotiated with. Very worried about my story, she called her friend to ask him the name of Shoei's agency. Her friend responded that he was there all day yesterday and there were no negotiations that day. No one named Shoei showed up either. His friend added that normally they wouldn't send first years alone to negotiate with other agencies anyway. He lied to me. He didn't come to my town to negotiate. He probably didn't even work at a real estate agency. He had come especially to find me, and he certainly didn't have good intentions. I even confirmed afterward with the izakaya in question. The Sapporo they serve is filtered, and they've never seen a white deposit at the bottom of their glasses. I blamed myself for letting my guard down and telling myself a charming boy who didn't seem to have problems with girls couldn't possibly be dangerous. After that, I blocked and deleted him from my account and vowed never to meet anyone on a dating app ever again. Hi, my name is Valentine, and I'm going to tell you about a pretty scary experience that happened to me. I'm 21 now, almost 22, but every time I think about this story, I get a chill. At the time of the events, I was in high school. I don't remember exactly, but I would say I was somewhere around 16 or 17 years old. Definitely in my second year. To get to high school every morning, I would take the bus. You should know that I have a journey of about 10 minutes to the closest stop to my house. But since the bus is often full at this stop, I generally have to walk 5 minutes more to the next one in order to have a better chance of actually getting a seat. That morning, it was Monday. When I left home, it was dark. It was winter, so that was fairly normal. I'm a fairly anxious person. And as on my route I passed through a fairly isolated place with very few pedestrians around, I would only put my music on once I arrived at the bus stop, in order to remain alert to what was happening around me. That day I arrived at the bus stop without any problem. I was just about to start my music up when I heard someone calling out from my left. I took off my headphones and looked at the person who just called out to me. He was a friend of my older brother's. They were together in college. He told me that recently while speaking with my brother, he learned that we took the same bus, and he found that quite amusing. At the time I didn't really pay much attention, but when I think about it now, that sentence should have caught my attention immediately. I had never seen him at this bus stop before. We started talking, the bus arrived, and I got on, but he didn't. This obviously concerned me. I didn't ask myself any more questions though, as I had a place I needed to be and rushed forward to take the last seat. The next morning I met this man again, still at the bus stop. We talked once more. Once again the bus arrives, I get on, and not him. This cycle would last a few days, until Friday. I met the same boy again, not at the usual bus stop, but this time at the closest one to my house. The one I ignored on my way. I pretended not to see him and continued to the other stop when he called out to me. He joined me and walked to the bus stop with me. During the trip he began to ask me strange questions. Do you always take this trip alone? What time do you leave your home? In the evening, what time do you come home? Which bus? Are your parents at home when you arrive? I quickly understood these were not just trivial questions, and tried to avoid answering. It's kinda weird that you go to this bus stop when the other one is closer to your house. Do you live here? And then he listed out my address. I got a crazy bad feeling, adding to all the questions that he had just started asking me. Already setting a weird vibe. He had never seen my house before. He was a boy my brother got along well with at college, but not close enough to come to our home. As a result, he shouldn't have had any way of knowing my address. I didn't answer, but he continued. You walk pretty quickly, huh? You always leave your house at 7:30. You get here so fast. I froze. I hadn't answered his question earlier, so I hadn't told him what time I usually left. That rung in the air for what felt like an eternity until the bus finally arrived. I got in and felt a bit liberated, but I could hear him calling behind me. I'll see you tonight. He waved at me and smiled. I was starting to panic. My stomach started to hurt, and I couldn't really think very well. I took out my phone and sent a message to my older brother. I asked him to tell his friend to leave me alone, and that he made me feel uncomfortable. My brother called me immediately. I haven't spoken to this guy since middle school. What did he say to you? There I understood. I understood he hadn't been in contact with this man for a very long time. The man had lied before he started talking to me. On the verge of tears, I told my brother everything. All the strange questions he asked me. All the information he knew that he shouldn't have. My brother told me he would sort everything out, and I didn't have to worry anymore. When the evening arrived, I got off the bus, and to my surprise, the man was not there. I rushed home, looking behind me the entire way to make sure he wasn't going to attack me or something. Arriving in my house, I rushed to the door, opened it, and locked it behind myself. My brother wouldn't be home until an hour later, which seemed like an eternity. He came right to me, hugged me, and said, "You don't have to worry about that guy anymore. I've taken care of him. He won't bother you ever again." I never knew exactly what my brother did to that man. But I never ran into him again, and that's all that matters. There remain a lot of gray areas in this story that will surely never be clarified, like for example, how he found my address or the time I left home every day. I think he must have followed me, but I prefer not to think about that too much. Since that day I walk even faster when I'm alone, and after this story I try to get dropped off directly at my bus stop by car as often as possible.